Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. Well, for the first time in history, movie theaters are no longer the number one priority of the studios. Now they need to consider streaming. What will work on streaming? Even movies that lose money at the movie theater can still be a good investment for them for their streaming business. That's good. That's all well and nice, except that they're no longer focused on producing movies that will primarily work in movie theaters. That is a significant change. It's never happened before in the entire history of the movie theater business. According to Google, the first indoor movie theater opened July 26, 1896. Now we have this. From the New York Times, here's a Hollywood twist. Streaming success runs through theaters. Just a few years ago, media executives thought theatrical releases didn't benefit their streaming services. Now, many of them think the opposite. Amazon Studios spent $250 million to make Red One, a comedic holiday action film starring Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans. Then the company pushed the film into more than 4,000 theaters, spending tens of millions of dollars more to market the movie. But the movie only racked up about $80 million in domestic box office receipts in recent weeks, half of which goes to the theater operators. It looked like a huge investment gone horribly bad. Not so fast, Amazon says. We did this for a very specific reason, according to Courtney Valente, the company's head of film. And that reason, to make it a streaming hit. It's not to say they would have been disappointed if the movie was a huge hit in theaters. It's to say they don't care if it's a huge hit in theaters. Theaters for now are fast becoming only a promotional vehicle to promote movies for their streaming services. When you have that kind of a shift in priority and that kind of a shift in focus, you don't sit around figuring out, like, how can we make money on this movie in movie theaters? How can we get that audience interested in what we're doing? You focus and say, okay, well, look, we can still take in some money in the movie theaters. That's fine. But as long as it gets people on our streaming service, then we can trap them into subscriptions. That's what's really important. That kind of approach changes the industry completely. We never put movies out to say, oh, will they do well on cable? Let's do this movie because it will do well on cable. That was always like extra. How about broadcast TV or paid TV or DVDs or VHS? No, never. Never was it done before to consider like, well, we'll make this movie. We don't care how it does in movie theaters as long as it does well in those extra ancillary markets. For much of the past decade, Hollywood executives striving to catch Netflix started believing that the only way to increase the subscriber numbers for their own streaming services was either by significantly narrowing the time between a film's theatrical release and its appearance on streaming, or by putting out both simultaneously. Disney did that with Black Widow, much to the dismay of Scarlett Johansson, who ultimately wound up pretty happy because she threatened them with a lawsuit and they paid her an absurd amount of money, tens of millions of dollars. Warner Brothers also did that with Dune. They thought that was the future. On top of that, the thinking went, streaming would give more movie studios a chance to spend far less on the expensive marketing required for a theatrical release. The algorithm would do all the work instead. But the industry has now largely come to a very different conclusion. The key to making a movie a streaming success and attracting new subscribers is to first release it in theaters. It turns out that all the things that make theatrical movies successful, expansive marketing and public relations campaigns, and valuable word of mouth, continue to help movies perform once they land in the home. But we really believe that this theatrical marketing campaign and a theatrical window for this movie will only further amplify and enhance what we've always believed was going to be a strong performance for the service, according to Ms. Valente. When Red One debuted on Prime Video, it became the number one movie on the service, generating 50 million worldwide viewers in the first 4 days, according to the company. It was Amazon MGM Studios' most watched streaming film debut ever, even though Red One is still playing on over 3,000 screens in North America, making it the latest theatrical release to find a big audience online. Since August 2022, 65% of Netflix's weekly top 10 English language films were movies it had licensed from studios after they debuted in theaters. And when Nielsen, the audience measurement company, crunched its data for the past 2 years, only 3 of its top 20 streaming movies of 2023 had been released straight to a streaming service. The outliers were Disney's Turning Red, which was first released to its service in 2022. In 2024, only 4 films in the top 20 went straight to streaming. 2 of them, Netflix's Beverly Hills Cop Axel F and Amazon's remake of Roadhouse, were based on previous theatrical titles. The 2 streaming originals that made the list were Netflix's action film Damsel, starring Millie Bobby Brown, and the heist film Lift with Kevin Hart. Quote, "You can objectively look at the data and see. Movies that have gone through the theatrical window perform better," said Casey Bloys, who has overseen HBO content since 2016 and has overseen the Max streaming service since 2020. Quote, "For us, I know it for a fact, and you can see it in data for other platforms. We're not the only one." Mr. Bloy's sentiment is being echoed all over Hollywood. Quote, "The better it does in theaters, the better it does on streaming," said Joe Early, the head of Disney Plus and Hulu. During Disney's most recent earnings call, its chief executive Bob Iger said, quote, "A successful Disney movie today drives more value than it ever has in the past, affecting all his other businesses, including streaming, theme parks, and consumer products." It's not only new films that benefit from the copious marketing dollars spent on theatrical releases. Summer blockbusters often cost north of $100 million in global marketing money, while even the smallest films have a hard time opening in theaters with marketing spends lower than $25 million. So $25 million is pretty much the price of entry. When new chapters of a successful franchise are introduced to theaters, they prompt spikes in each company's catalog of films. Paramount Plus said that when A Quiet Place Day 1 premiered on its service, viewers increased their engagement with other films in the Quiet Place franchise by 207%. For Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, the percentage increase in interest in other Mission Impossible movies was 181%. Quote, "I think there's no doubt that theatrical films drive not only signups to streaming services, but obviously drive engagement too," according to Brian Robbins, the chief executive of Paramount Pictures. Quote, "They're a very, very powerful acquisition tool. Movies are not supposed to be acquisition tools. They're supposed to be art. But they're not art anymore. We're lucky if they just come out at all. They're marketing tools so they can sell their streaming subscriptions. That's how bad it's gotten." In many ways, the same hand-wringing that went into the latest declaration of the death of the multiplex is what fueled similar panic when new consumer technologies like televisions and DVD rentals were introduced. Mr. Robbins recalled that back in 2022, when he told an investor conference that theatrical movies would remain the cornerstone of Paramount's business, it was a radical position to take. Quote, "At that time, everybody was freaking out about how streaming was going to cannibalize theatrical," he said. "It was a phenomenon," he said, "that never happened. It never happened. Now they're talking about streaming like that's the entire priority and purpose. All the advertising money, all the story planning, everything that they're doing is to create a theatrical release that generates awareness that they can then use to generate streaming signups." Streaming has absorbed the entire industry now. And one of the problems with that is now you've got a few major streaming services that will dictate distribution of movies. Because if you don't have your own streaming service, there will be very few companies that can afford to produce the movie, make it work in movie theaters, because they don't have their own streaming services to leverage off of. Sony does that, but all the other studios really don't do that. The independent business model is completely blown, which is why if you have any kind of publishing or entertainment business, you need to have a direct-to-consumer component, and that has to be the focus, because everything has moved towards that now. Mr. Early of Disney said the thought process just a few years ago was that if you started promoting a previous film in a franchise on a streaming service, it would create consumer confusion over which film was in the theaters. Quote, "Back in 2020, we would not have merchandised Inside Out, meaning promoted it on Disney Plus all that much. Quote, "There was a thinking back then that if you do that, people will think that Inside Out 2 is also on Disney Plus and they won't go to the theaters." Inside Out 2 did like $1.7 billion worldwide, so that wasn't a problem. And according to Nielsen, Inside Out is the 6th most watched streaming movie of 2024. Inside Out 2 is the year's highest grossing film and the highest grossing ever animated film. Just a few years ago, Disney Plus would have never promoted a theatrical movie on Disney Plus because they didn't want to point out to their customers that they would not have access to them as a streaming customer. Now the promotions are often prominent. Mr. Early uses the most recent Planet of the Apes movie as an example. When Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes entered theaters in May, the marketing team provided Hulu subscribers with an exclusive look at the film, an effort that gave them more reason to watch the 8 other Planet of the Apes films available in the Hulu library and build excitement for the new film, even if they never made it to a theater to watch the movie. Fans, Mr. Early said, were ravenous when the film hit the streaming service. Netflix is now the outlier in Hollywood, still avoiding wide theatrical releases for the movies it produces. The company continues to argue that putting a film in theaters detracts from viewership on streaming. It recently lost out on a $150 million bid to make Wuthering Heights for the service, with Margot Robbie and the writer-director Emerald Fennell opting for an offer that was some $50 million lower in exchange for the guarantee of a theatrical release. And why accept less money? I mean, $50 million is a lot of money, because filmmakers want to make films that are shown in movie theaters. Yet, while few Netflix films have ever pierced the zeitgeist, the company, with 283 million subscribers, far more than any streaming service, is doing something right. Still, all studios are being more selective about what movies they are willing to put into theaters because the cost to break through an ever-crowded marketplace of entertainment options is more expensive than ever. But when we make a movie and release it to theaters, it has to have a level of undeniability that's going to make people leave the comfort of their homes, according to Keith Legoy, Sony's chairman of worldwide distribution. In 2021, Mr. Legoy made a deal with Netflix whereby every one of Sony's theatrical releases would head to the streaming giant after appearing in theaters. 30 of the 32 Sony films landed in Netflix's top 10. 19 of them hit number 1. Universal Pictures signed a similarly lucrative deal with the streamer that year for its animated films and renewed it last month to add an exclusive 10-month Netflix window for the company's live-action movies. In the past few years, Netflix's top films have been dominated by Universal animated titles like the Super Mario movie and Minions: The Rise of Gru. Still, the theatrical movie business is very risky. For every Wicked that becomes a cultural phenomenon, there's a Joker too, for which equal amounts of effort went into determining its success, only to have audiences flat out rejected in theaters. Because they rejected the audience by not making Joker 2 anything like Joker 1. That's all it takes to ruin a franchise and lose a lot of money. Yet, like the marketing campaign for Red 1, the one for Joker will not go to waste supposedly, which grossed only $58 million at the domestic box office to have a strong showing on Max. And he was right. Max released the movie on a Friday, and it was the service's #1 title over the weekend. Quote, just because the box office didn't meet a certain threshold, I'm still happy to have it on the streaming service, he said. It is the nature of technology to change distribution. That's completely understandable. The problem, though, is if you're not going to be able to just make an independent movie, if you're not going to be able to get studios to focus on making good movies because they have movies that will, quote, work when it comes to putting them on their streaming services, we're really losing an art form. For more than 100 years, movie theaters were the focus of movie making. Now they're really not anymore. Now they're a promotional vehicle for studios to push their streaming services. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.